The Suicide Squad is one of the most chaotic rosters in comic book movie history. Criminals, killers, a literal shark, and one guy who just really believes in peace. But every single member has a story that's darker and more layered than you'd expect. So today, I'm breaking down every member of the Suicide Squad and everything that makes them tick, starting with the one guy who probably shouldn't have been there at all, Rick Flag. Rick Flag is the only member of the Suicide Squad who isn't a criminal. Let that sink in for a second. Every single person standing next to him is a convicted murderer, a psychopath, or a man-eating shark. And he's just a US Army colonel with a clean service record and a really unfortunate assignment. He's the straight man in a team of absolute lunatics. And his entire arc across both films is the slow, painful realization that the institution he served his whole life might be worse than any of them. In the 2016 Midway City operation, Flag was Task Force X's field commander. He carried individual nanobomb detonator buttons for each squad member, which is a fun workplace dynamic. When Slipknot tried to make a run for it, Flag triggered his device without hesitation. Head gone. Message received. But here's the thing. During the final fight against Enchantress, Flag did something nobody expected. He destroyed his own detonator. Just smashed it. Freed every single member of the squad from their kill switches in the middle of a world-ending battle. He'd fought alongside these people long enough to know they'd stay and fight anyway. He bet their lives on their character, not their chains, and he was right. That moment is quietly the emotional peak of the entire first film. Then came Corto Maltese in 2021, and everything changed. Flag discovered hard evidence that the American government was directly complicit in Project Starfish, a horrific experimental program that had been torturing and killing people for decades. He grabbed the drive. He was going to expose everything. Peacemaker put a blade through his chest for it. Flag didn't die because he was expendable. Every other squad member dies because they're disposable. Flag died because he was inconvenient. He was murdered by his own teammate to protect the same government he'd given his entire career to. That's not a battlefield death. That's an assassination dressed up as operational necessity. And the worst part? It worked. The truth stayed buried. The one man who tried to hold it accountable didn't make it out. But if Flag represents the system's conscience, wait until you meet the woman who designed the system to not have one. Amanda Waller. Every squad has a leader, and every leader answers to someone. But in the case of Task Force X, the person at the top is more dangerous than anyone she's ever sent into the field, and she's never thrown a single punch. Amanda Waller is the director of ARGUS, and the entire reason the Suicide Squad exists. After Superman died, Waller looked at the situation and arrived at a very specific conclusion. The next superpowered being to show up might not be so friendly. So rather than hope for the best, she built a program designed to weaponize the worst people on the planet. Convicted criminals, metahumans, certifiably insane killers, all fitted with nanobombs in their necks, and promised reduced sentences if they behave, which is, not ideal. Here's the thing about Waller. She never steps foot on a battlefield. She never fires a weapon. She sits in a control room with a tablet and a kill switch, and that makes her the most powerful person in the entire franchise. Every operative gets exactly as much information as she decides they need, which is almost nothing. She compartmentalizes everything so that no single squad member ever understands the full scope of what they're doing or why. It's like being handed a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and being told you'll explode if you don't finish it in time. She survived the 2016 Midway City disaster. She survived the Corto Maltese operation in 2021. Zero combat ability. Zero superpowers. Her durability comes entirely from the fact that she possesses enough classified government information to make herself politically untouchable. Nobody can fire her because nobody wants to find out what she'll release on the way out the door. But here's where it gets dark. During the Corto Maltese mission, Waller discovered that exposing Project Starfish would reveal American governmental involvement in horrific experiments. Her solution? Order the suppression of evidence. When Rick Flag tried to do the right thing and go public, Waller's framework enabled Peacemaker to murder him to keep the secret buried. The woman running a program designed to control criminals authorized the killing of her own loyal soldier to protect the government from accountability. Let that sink in. The criminals on the squad robbed banks and threw boomerangs at people. Waller covered up war crimes, and she's the one holding the leash. She's not a villain with a cape or a monologue. She's a bureaucrat with a budget and zero ethical boundaries. And that's infinitely scarier. The real answer to who's the most dangerous member of the Suicide Squad has never been on the squad at all. But if Waller is the brain behind Task Force X, there's one operative who's become the face of it, and she's got a baseball bat and a PhD, Harley Quinn. Now, most people on the Suicide Squad are dangerous because of what they can do. Harley Quinn is dangerous because of what she understands. Before she was swinging a baseball bat through Gotham and face paint, she was Dr. Harleen Quinzel, a psychiatry intern at Arkham Asylum. She had the clinical training to diagnose personality disorders, map behavioral patterns, and identify psychological vulnerabilities in the most dangerous criminals alive. And then, she fell in love with one of them. Her relationship with the Joker is the kind of thing that sounds romantic romantic if you're not paying attention and deeply horrifying if you are. She's described it herself better than anyone else could. When your taste in men is as bad as mine, they don't just go away quietly. They slash your tires and they kill your dogs and tell you that the music you like ain't real music at all. And all the cruelty tears you apart after a while. That's not a woman who doesn't know what happened to her. That's a woman who can clinically articulate exactly how she was dismantled and still chose to walk through it, which is, not ideal. Here's the thing about Harley that separates her from literally everyone else on the squad. She survived everything. Midway City in 2016, the Cordo Maltese disaster in 2021, and her entire solo emancipation arc in Birds of Prey, where she cut ties with the Joker and operated completely independently. People around her get shot, blown up, betrayed, eaten. She just keeps going. The franchise is cockroach, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. And the reason she keeps surviving isn't luck. It's psychological flexibility. Her psychiatric training gave her something nobody else on the roster has. Genuine self-awareness about her own damage. She knows she's unstable. She knows her patterns. She can read a room full of killers and predict who's going to snap before they even know it themselves. That's what made her so valuable to Waller. She could anticipate and manipulate her teammates' emotional responses while maintaining complete personal detachment from conventional morality. She's simultaneously the squad's therapist and its most unpredictable liability. The real arc isn't the combat skills or the chaos persona, it's the journey from someone who defined herself entirely through an abusive relationship to someone who operates on her own terms. The bubbly, bat-swinging maniac everyone sees on the surface is real, but underneath it is a clinically trained mind that never stopped analyzing, including itself. That's her superpower and her curse wrapped into one package. But self-awareness only gets you so far when you're standing next to a man who literally never misses. Deadshot. Floyd Lawton is the guy in the squad who actually knows what he's doing. While everyone else is having identity crises or eating people, Deadshot shows up, does the math, and puts a bullet exactly where it needs to go. Considered the deadliest marksman in the world, Lawton operated as an assassin and mercenary for hire with a personal code of conduct that separated him from your average trigger-happy lunatic. He wasn't chaotic, he was precise, he was professional, and that made him significantly more dangerous than half the metahumans Waller had locked up in Belle Reve. Batman eventually caught him, because of course he did, and Lawton ended up in a cell waiting to rot. But Waller saw something in his file that most people would overlook. She didn't just see a guy who never misses. She saw a guy with a daughter. Here's the thing about Deadshot that makes him genuinely interesting. Strip away the wrist-mounted guns and the body count, and his story is really about fatherhood. His daughter Zoe was the single point of vulnerability in an otherwise bulletproof operational profile. Every negotiation Lawton entered with Waller, every demand he made beyond personal freedom, centered entirely on Zoe's future. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for status or some penthouse in Metropolis. He wanted educational resources and financial security for his kid. That's it. The deadliest marksman on the planet, and his wish list reads like a parent-teacher conference agenda. And Waller knew exactly how to use that. See, you can threaten a man like Lawton with a nanobomb in his neck and he'll comply, but threaten his daughter's future, dangle the possibility that she gets a better life if daddy behaves? Now you've got genuine, sustainable motivation. Waller understood that leveraging Zoe represented infinitely superior control over Lawton than any crude explosive device ever could. The bomb keeps him in line. The daughter keeps him invested. That's not just management. That's psychological warfare disguised as a benefits package. Lawton survived the 2016 Midway City operation. He proved his value. He demonstrated loyalty under fire. And by all accounts, he should have been a cornerstone of every future squad deployment. But then he just vanished from the narrative entirely. No death scene. No explanation. Just gone. The real reason is straightforward. Will Smith had scheduling conflicts that prevented him from appearing in the 2021 sequel. Rather than recast the role, which would have been, not ideal, James Gunn introduced Bloodsport as a replacement specialized marksman played by Idris Elba. Same archetype, different guy. Zero acknowledgement of where Deadshot actually went. He was too valuable to kill off screen and too complicated to hand to another actor, so the franchise just quietly pretended he was somewhere else. Presumably still in Belle Reve, still negotiating for Zoe's college fund, still waiting for a phone call that never came. It's a fascinating piece of meta-storytelling. A character defined by never missing his target, and the franchise couldn't figure out where to aim him. But if Deadshot is the professional you'd actually want on your team, the next member is the exact opposite. The guy nobody wanted, nobody trusted, and nobody would miss. Captain Boomerang, every squad has that one guy who contributes absolutely nothing to group morale and somehow makes everything worse just by being in the room. Meet George Digger Harkness, a man whose entire criminal career started because he got really good at throwing a curved stick. Harkness grew up in poverty in rural Australia, the illegitimate child of an American toy manufacturer and an Australian woman. His old man eventually brought him to the States to work as a performing mascot for a Boomerang toy company, which is already one of the saddest origin stories in comics. But instead of channeling that humiliation into something productive, Digger decided the best use of his one marketable skill was a life of crime. Hey, I'm great with boomerangs. What career path makes sense? Ah, yes, supervillainy. Here's the thing about Captain Boomerang that separates him from everyone else on this roster. He has zero superpowers. None. No pyrokinesis, no superhuman durability, no mystical connection to ancient gods. He's just a guy with good hand-eye coordination and a collection of trick boomerangs rigged with explosives and tracking mechanisms. That's it. That's the whole resume. In a team featuring people who can literally control fire and tank bullets, Boomerang brought Australian persistence and a bad attitude, and Waller noticed. During the 2016 operation, Boomerang was the only squad member who seemed to receive zero meaningful leverage. Deadshot got promises about seeing his daughter. Others got reduced sentences. Boomerang got a firm handshake and a good luck. This wasn't random. Waller knew exactly what kind of man he was. Unreliable, selfish, and completely without loyalty. Case in point, when Slipknot made his escape attempt midway through the mission, it was Boomerang who egged him on. He convinced Slipknot the nanobombs were fake, knowing full well what would happen. Slipknot ran, his head exploded. Boomerang watched. He manipulated a teammate into testing whether the kill device was real, using another human being as a guinea pig so he didn't have to risk his own neck. That's either the most coldly pragmatic thing anyone on the squad ever attempted or the single most sociopathic decision in the history of coerced military operations. Probably both. But his little experiment revealed something Waller probably didn't love thinking about. The entire Task Force X model relies on the assumption that threatening someone with certain death keeps them obedient. Boomerang proved that someone chaotic enough will just find ways to game the system instead. Oh, you'll blow my head off? Let me find someone else's head to test that on first. That's the fundamental crack in Waller's system. You can't properly control someone who treats other people's lives like data points. Boomerang didn't weigh the moral implications. He just saw an opportunity and took it like a dog snatching food off a counter. The nanobomb was supposed to guarantee obedience, and one Australian man with zero conscience proved it only guaranteed compliance from people who actually valued their teammates' lives. But if you think Boomerang's complete absence of human empathy is wild, wait until you meet the squad member who would literally eat him, King Shark. Nanoway is the emotional Trojan horse of the entire Suicide Squad franchise. He's a giant shark man descended from an ancient shark god in Hawaiian mythology. He has superhuman durability that makes him nearly impossible to kill, and he wants to eat every single person standing next to him. On paper, he's the most dangerous thing in any room he walks into. In practice, he's basically a golden retriever with teeth. Here's the thing about King Shark that makes him work. He's genuinely sweet, like disarmingly, almost painfully sweet. His speech is limited to simple words and short phrases, his intellectual capacity is clearly restricted, and his understanding of complex tactical operations is essentially zero. He's not pretending to be dumb to gain sympathy, he just is what he is. A massive, indestructible predator with the emotional complexity of a toddler who happens to crave human flesh for breakfast, which is, not ideal for team bonding exercises. But the Cordo Maltese operation changed everything for him, because that's where he met Ratcatcher 2, and somehow, against every reasonable expectation, they became genuine friends. She treated him like a person, not a weapon, not a monster, not a liability that might eat the squad before they reached the objective, just a person. And Nanaue responded to that the way anyone starved for connection would. He latched on. Now here's where it gets interesting. When Bloodsport successfully blackmailed Amanda Waller at the end of the mission, that effectively neutralized the nanobomb threat for the entire surviving team, King Shark was free. No more explosive insurance policy in his neck, no more institutional leverage. He could have turned around, walked into the ocean, and disappeared forever. Nobody was going to stop him. Nobody could stop him. He stayed. Let that sit for a second. A creature defined entirely by appetite and instinct, a being that every tactical assessment would classify as uncontrollable without the threat of detonation, voluntarily chose to remain with his team when every coercive mechanism had been removed. He didn't stay because Waller told him to. He didn't stay because someone pointed a gun at his head. He stayed because Ratcatcher 2 was there. Because for the first time in his life, someone wanted him around for reasons that had nothing to do with what he could destroy. That's quietly one of the most powerful moments in either film. The most physically dangerous member of the squad proving that belonging mattered more to him than freedom. That Yet the social value of having friends, real friends who didn't flinch when he opened his mouth, outweighed every rational reason to flee. It's a childlike need for connection wrapped inside 1,500 pounds of apex predator, and it works because the film never once asks you to feel sorry for him. It just shows you who he is, and lets you figure it out. Nanaway, hand, not food, friend, that's the whole arc in 4 words. But if King Shark represents the purest heart on the squad, the next member represents something far more complicated. A man who kills for peace, and genuinely believes that makes him the hero. Peacemaker. Christopher Smith is the scariest kind of weapon on the Suicide Squad roster, and it's not because of his strength or his combat training. It's because he genuinely believes he's a good person. Every other member of Task Force X knows what they are. Deadshot knows he's a killer for hire. Harley knows she's unhinged. Boomerang knows he's a degenerate. But Peacemaker? Peacemaker thinks he's a hero. He kills for peace, so that nobody has to die for no reason. That's his philosophy. That's how he sleeps at night. And if you need to understand why that's more terrifying than any metahuman power, just look at what he did to Rick Flag. But first, we need to talk about how he was built. Because Peacemaker wasn't born. He was manufactured. His father, Augie Smith, was a white supremacist and leader of a hate group called the Aryan Empire, operating under the alias White Dragon. Augie trained Chris to fight and kill from childhood, not as survival preparation, but as ideological indoctrination. Violence wasn't a last resort in the Smith household. It was the curriculum. And the graduation ceremony came early, because as a kid, Chris was forced into a bare-knuckle boxing match against his older brother Keith. Chris killed him. That moment is the hinge point for everything Peacemaker becomes. After Keith's death, he needed every act of violence to mean something, because if it didn't, then his brother died for nothing, and he was just a murderer raised by a monster. So he built the philosophy, peace at any cost, every kill justified, every casualty necessary. It's not a belief system, it's a coping mechanism with a body count. And then Amanda Waller found him, which is, not ideal. During the Corto Maltese operation, Rick Flag discovered evidence that the United States government was directly involved in Project Starfish. Flag wanted to expose it. Peacemaker murdered him to keep it buried. Not because he hated Flag, not because he was ordered to at gunpoint, because he believed suppressing that information served the greater good. He killed a teammate who trusted him with absolute conviction that it was the right thing to do. That's the moment the audience realizes this isn't a funny guy with a silly helmet. This is a weapon pointed wherever the government tells him to aim. His father built the gun. Waller just picked it up and started firing. The HBO Max series peeled back more of this, showing Chris wrestling with his brother's death, his father's abuse, and his own awareness that something inside him is fundamentally broken. And that's the cruel part. He knows. He can see the damage. But knowing you're broken and being able to fix yourself are two completely different things. He has just enough self-awareness to understand what was done to him, and nowhere near enough to stop repeating the pattern. He's not a mercenary killing for money. He's not a psychopath killing for pleasure. He's a true believer, and true believers are the ones you can never negotiate with, because they've already decided they're right. But if Peacemaker shows you what happens when trauma gets weaponized through ideology, the next entry shows you what happens when it gets weaponized through something far less controllable. El Diablo. Every single member of this squad was dragged into service, kicking and screaming. Every single one of them had a bomb shoved in their neck and a gun pointed at their back, except Chato Santana. He walked into prison on his own 2 feet and asked to stay there. Here's the thing about El Diablo. He was born with pyrokinetic abilities, powerful enough to level city blocks, and for a while, he used them exactly the way you'd expect. He became a gang leader. Turns out, being able to set literally anything on fire with your mind is a pretty effective negotiation tool. He had power, he had money, he had a family, and then he lost all of it in about 30 seconds. During a heated argument at home, Santana lost control. His fire didn't care that his wife was standing there. It didn't care that his 2 children were in the house. His powers burned everything. His wife, both kids, gone. Not because some villain attacked them, because he couldn't keep his own abilities in check for one moment when it actually mattered. After that, Chata walked into a police station and turned himself in. Not to cut a deal. He wanted to be punished. He wanted a cage. Every other member of this squad spent their time in Belle Reve trying to figure out how to get out. Diablo spent his trying to figure out how to deserve being kept in, and that's what makes his role in the Midway City operation so painful. Waller recruited him because he was a walking flamethrower, but Santana refused to use his powers. Flat out, refused. The team is getting torn apart by Enchantress's forces, and this guy is standing there with his hands in his pockets like he's waiting for a bus. Deadshot practically begged him to fight, but from Santana's perspective, the last time he let loose, his children died. So no, he wasn't doing that again. Not for Waller, not for a reduced sentence, not for anything. That tension between what he could do and what he would allow himself to do is the entire emotional engine of his arc. Everyone else was trying to survive the mission. Diablo was trying to survive himself. Then came Incubus. When nothing else was working and the ancient entity was about to wipe them all out, Santana finally made a choice. He didn't just use his powers. He transformed. His true form erupted out of him, a towering flaming skeleton avatar rivaling Incubus in raw size and power. Everything he'd been suppressing, every ounce of pyrokinetic destruction locked away behind guilt and grief, came pouring out at once. You watched this man refuse to fight for an hour and a half, so when he finally does, it hits different. But he didn't just fight Incubus. He held him in place and told his team to detonate the bomb underneath them both. He knew exactly what that meant. He chose it anyway. Chato Santana's death wasn't institutional waste. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a man who killed his own family, deciding that the only meaningful thing left to do with his power was use it to save the people standing next to him. He achieved something nobody else on this squad managed. Genuine redemption. Not because the system allowed it, but because he chose it despite the system. Waller built Task Force X on the assumption that these people were expendable tools with zero moral agency. Diablo proved her wrong. The most volatile recruit on the entire roster became the most meaningful loss either film ever produced. And that's not an accident. That's a guy who spent his whole life being a weapon finally deciding what he was willing to aim at. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.